Welcome to Where Parents Talk. My name is Lianne Castelino. Our guests today are parents of three. Dr. Catherine Hansen is an obstetrician-gynecologist and menopause practitioner. She's also a coach and speaker. Her husband, Jeremy Hansen, is a physicist, a CF-18 pilot, and an astronaut. Colonel Hansen is slated to become the first Canadian to travel to the moon in November of 2024 as part of the 10-day Artemis mission. It will be the first of its kind trip to the moon since the Apollo missions in 1972. Dr. and Colonel Hansen join us from Houston. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Looking forward to it.
So the two of you are parents of three, and I wonder, had you always wanted to become parents?
Yeah, it was always in the cards for us right from the very beginning. But it is something I make sure to tell my patients. It takes a lot of courage to decide to prioritize other things and not become parents. But for us, it was always a hope and a dream that we had.
Yeah, for sure. It's one of those things that I didn't really know where it was going to fit. I had these big ambitions, but I always sort of had this sense that that was something that I would like to have as part of my life journey. And so, yeah, really just think, your question makes me think about it. I'm just really grateful that that all worked out.
Going hand in hand with the desire to have children is very quickly after that is how do you parent them and what is your parenting style and your approach? Dr. Hansen, did you think about that prior to having children? And then what is your parenting style?
Yeah, I definitely hadn't given that a lot of thought before having children. And so it was kind of live and learn and learn trial by fire. Jeremy is obviously military, so there's a lot of hierarchy involved. And I think we became a really good team very, very quickly when the kids were really little.
Yeah, when I look back on it, we did sort of like the trial run with the dog. So did the dog first and thought, okay, we did pretty good with the dog, so maybe we're ready for kids. But of course, I think as all parents realize, you're just in over your head, and it's more of a survival game. Or at least I did not feel equipped or that I had a good plan for it. I think we were just adapting the entire time.
It's interesting to hear you say that because you have had three children that were very young in sort of quick succession. You've got an 18-year-old now and 17-year-old twins. And I can't imagine what that was like because of the age gap and also because both of you are in positions that require a lot of preparation. So for you both to enter this without, as you say, much preparation, it must have been a unique challenge.
Yeah, extremely unique. I think there were, for me, a few times I thought, are we really doing this? Do we really want to be doing this? And once you have kids, you have to figure those things out. I'm very organized. So as soon as I feel a little bit out of control, I start to go to lists, schedules, and a lot of patterns. And I still have lists from when the kids were really little about all the things that had to get done through the day. And that just somehow made me feel a little bit more in control. But I must say, we had a lot of help around us and we pulled in a lot of support too.
Yeah, and I think, the other thing looking back on it that Catherine and I are complementary and, we are very different in our approach to things. Catherine is kind of detail oriented and does keep track of a lot of things. And I'm a little bit more laissez-faire with things, but there's a balance there. The strength in both of those approaches, on their own, it'd be tough. But the fact that we had one another to get through these times, I'm just grateful for that. I see a lot of the flaws in my approach to life sometimes when it comes to keeping three kids on a schedule.
Absolutely. Along those lines, what would you say has surprised you most, each of you, along your parenting journey?
Well, I often tell people having, we had an 18-month-old son and then twin girls, and that it was like a social experiment going on in our home where we had these three children who were really close together with all the same stimuli and inputs, and then like two twin girls with the exact same life experiences. And we really, our survival technique for getting through twins with 3 kids in the house was routine. And, if one woke up and needed to be fed, then they both got fed at the same time. And so like they really were having a similar life experience. And it was so obvious the whole way through that these children arrived with some pre-existing wiring going on in their brain. I mean, they were not the same, not at all. They were very, very different from day one. And just to see that so concretely, this whole nature versus nurture aspect has just been a really fun social experiment to kind of witness firsthand. And what I've kind of come to the conclusion of is that, there is this preconditioning that they arrive with. I can't explain it, but they just do. And then the nurture part is, teaching them to use their approach, their viewpoints, their perspectives, how they interpret things, how they see things differently, is teaching them how to use those gifts in the world. That's the nurture part. So you do definitely influence their life journey, but there's each one of them needs a very different approach and very different parenting approach to it. Yeah, it's really fascinating to me when I think about it.
Yeah, truly fascinating that we had to kind of reinvent many things we did for each of them individually. And I think what has been most surprising for me, I see a lot of people who say, oh, my children are growing up, how sad. And of course it is bittersweet, but for me, it just gets better and better and better and better. And I've been constantly surprised at what they teach me and how even at a very young age, they were able to really be in engaging conversations. They became little adults very quickly. And there's many, many mature things that we can talk about. And especially now at the ages that they're at, they've really become friends. I mean, we'll always be their parents, but they've really become, friends that we can interact with on that level. That's fascinating and really fulfilling.
It's so interesting to hear you describe your twins. And I wonder, had either of you had any experience with multiples in your family prior to knowing that you're going to have twins?
No, I have one set of cousins that are twins, but they're identical. Ours are fraternal, and so very different mechanism of coming into the world as those different types of twins. So no, we were surprised at that. We had our children a little bit later in life, and that actually contributes to having twins. So I can't say it was it was a complete shock, but looking back at it, it's not surprising.
It was not a complete shock because Catherine, being an obstetrician-gynecologist, had kind of, warned us about this, but it was shocking. That's for sure. And having witnessed the whole thing, I often joke, I think this is a design flaw in humanity that you can, as a human being, have to carry multiples. It just seems insane to me looking back at it.
One of the things in terms of talking to a doctor and an astronaut that, jumps off the page is the idea of how do you parent in a high achieving family? Because clearly you are both in professions that are high achieving. And so how do you manage that? What was your strategy around that? What is your strategy, especially in the world that we live in today that is so uber competitive?
Yeah, for me, it really became, like I said, pulling in support. It really became about leaning on the people that we knew would be able to help us and willing to help us and desiring to help us. Or when the children were little, we lived on a military base. And so we had a lot of other families going through sort of similar spouses traveling, similar professional lives. And we really leaned on a lot of people. And I think that for me was the biggest survival mechanism that we had available.
Yeah, it's interesting to look back on it, being a fighter pilot in the Air Force. And just like I literally would call Catherine sometimes and just say, I'm not in Cold Lake anymore. I can't tell you when I'll be back, but like maybe, that you normally meant like 2 weeks. No notice, just gone. And her being, on call and still having to do all that. I mean, we really relied on a lot of help. And, for as much demand as was put on Catherine, she still had to be the really stable, reliable one that kind of got us through that. And so I would not say we had a good strategy. We just didn't have a lot of choices. Our choices were stop our careers. One of us stop our career, full stop, or just do the very best we can, or we could at the time, and just accept. That's what, when you kind of look at life, what makes you happy. You're happiest when you just accept where you are, and you just do the very best you can with it. And that's sort of how we got through all of that. We accepted that we had made these commitments to these careers. They were important to both of us. I was serving my country. Catherine was like serving a whole community. I mean, they were really leaning on her. And so we could have changed either of those things, but we really didn't want to. And we used to say things to each other like, this isn't, the parenting journey for everybody to emulate. It's tough, and I don't know, how it calculates and whether it's good or bad for the kids. It certainly didn't at the time. But we used to say things like, well, we are going to show them what it is like to pursue your dreams. I mean, we all say we want our kids to pursue their dreams. Well, when does that change to, as soon as they become a parent, they should stop pursuing their dreams? We used to think about things like that. And then in hindsight, for people who are still parenting and grappling with this, I'd say the same thing to them as I would say to young kids I talk to in schools these days is, just follow your passions, do your best. And then for parents, create a loving environment. And I'm just amazed at how resilient our kids are and how independent and strong they are. But they were always loved and supported. I think we made a lot of mistakes. I know we made a lot of mistakes as parents, but those simple things, just pursuing our passions and loving and supporting and respecting them, it seemed to like smooth over all the little errors we had along the way.
Yeah. Eventually, for sure, Jeremy speaks of acceptance, and there were many, many times when it didn't feel like acceptance was possible in some of those situations. For sure, there were some tremendous challenges. We'll say solo parenting 3 babies and going into the hospital on call, and sometimes having to take 3 with me, and nurses having to watch them while we did rounds. And I was the only OBGYN in our small town in northern Alberta, so there really weren't a lot of options for us. But that's one of the things that continues to surprise me about the children, is as they grow, they're able to really articulate the things that they value. And our children have been really vocal around how much they are inspired by my work even, and of course by their father's work, and how much they see the role modeling and how much they really respect the ways that we have continued to pursue those dreams. So although it hasn't always been a smooth road, it's so nice to see them as young adults being able to share those things. And I will say, even when Jeremy was away, he would dig in. There were times we set up some traditions that would keep me sane, pancake morning breakfast, which I could do slowly, and pizza night on Friday nights, because that was easy. And there were times when Jeremy was around the other side of the world and actually ordering our pizza delivery, because for him, being able to contribute in those ways and make just a few things easier just kept him engaged and kept us moving forward as a unit.
It is really inspiring to hear you describe that, because taking 3 children to work when you're an obstetrician-gynecologist, I mean, it's just a sentence that you uttered, but it could not have been easy on multiple levels. So I wonder, when you think back on it, you talk about, you had a support, which is fantastic, but was there anything else that you really relied on to get you through some of those really challenging times? And a lot of the time you're on your own as a parent.
Yeah, I have to say, I really relied on Jeremy a lot of times. And of course, all the other people in our world that were in our orbit, literally helping us. But when push came to shove, I would just let him know, we need some help here, and we're going to have to find a way, and we would problem solve it together.
Yeah. And, I think, as I'm listening to us describe this, somebody who's not on this call with us, but is Irma, who is a live-in nanny through some of those really, really tough times, just to give us the consistency that we needed, for Catherine to be able to get up at 1 a.m. and drive to the hospital to deliver a baby. And so we definitely owe a great debt of gratitude to Irma, for sure.
Yeah, many times we would drive by, I would have the kids and we would pass them into her car, and I would continue on to the hospital at full speed. There were many situations like that we were just in the moment trying to figure things out.
Now, in terms of your childhood, each of you, did your childhood impact the way that you parent, or did it?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I had a very positive childhood, positive upbringing, a loving family, supportive family. I can't think of anything, along the way where I just wasn't supported to grow and play sports. I grew up on a farm, where hard work was valued and modeled for me, and so that was just a part of my life. I mean, for me, that is just how you got through life: is you worked hard, you respected others, and so I mean, that's probably one too. Is like I was really taught by my parents to respect others, and to understand that it takes a community, and to value the contributions of others. Those are really important things. And Catherine and I, we believe that in the depths of our souls as well, and we communicate that into our children. And I think, and we try to model that for our children. We certainly try to, we have tried to help them understand, and we see them in the world with these values too. And I think, even with the ups and downs of parenting, and I want to highlight this a couple of times, like we look back and we see lots of things we did wrong and wish we'd done different. But putting these really kind of core values into your children, like that being a priority, a shared priority for both parents, like treating one another with respect, modeling two parents respecting each other, even though there's lots of stress and disagreement sometimes. Modeling that really starts to like pay long-term dividends when you get to these teenager years and young adult years. It really starts to show up and make it manageable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my parents have been married 61 years, and so incredible role models. And we're both, Jeremy and I, very blessed to have our parents still with us and still married and still role modeling, still contributing very, very much to our children's lives. So I as well had parents who really taught structure and discipline and ways of bringing opportunities and exposing me to many, many things. And I was just talking to the kids about this recently, how, when you're exposed to all these opportunities and these diverse activities and things that you can do as children, it really helps you hone in on the things that you really love and enjoy. And as our children are at the stages that they're trying to figure out what to do with the rest of their lives, or at least the first stage of the rest of their lives, I think back to a lot of the ways my parents influenced that for me, and hopefully I'll be able to do that for them as well.
When you talk about values and instilling values from a young age as a family, we live in a world where there's so much noise around that very point, and people can get lost or confused or have that noise drown out some of those values. How do you go about continuing to instill them in your children as they approach young adulthood?
That's an interesting question. I think it really just comes down to, leadership by example. Something we talk a lot about in the military, and both Catherine and I just fundamentally believe these things, and we amplify them in our speech when we talk about world events around the dinner table. These are things that we amplify, and we hear them coming back, from our children. I think, the messaging may be complicated for people, but the gist of it is not complicated. Like everyone has equal value and brings value to the world and deserves respect. It can be spoken about very simply. And there are lots of complicating aspects around that, but it never changes the core value of everybody has equal value and deserves respect.
Yeah, and you speak about the noise, and this is one of the major ways I've evolved my work. There's a lot of soulful work that I do with women as well. It's actually my real passion, and I think we can calm the noise when we really make intentional effort to be present in our lives. And so with the children, it's the same. I mean, they're like all kids, they've got their devices all the time, but we really make an effort to quiet the noise and come together in conversation. So I can't say we have every dinner together, but we certainly try. We share meal preparation, we share meals whenever we possibly can. We have FaceTime very, very regularly when we're not together. And we make those opportunities quiet so that everything else around us can just be set aside, and we as a family can realize that above all, we have each other. And we say that to them a lot. This is the most important team you will ever be on. And as Jeremy takes core culture into some of the work that he does at NASA, he does the same for the family. So we have whiteboard meetings, and we have dinner conversations, and we watch, documentaries or skill related shows together. And we have those types, or we go backcountry camping together where there is no noise. We make those efforts. And while we still can with the kids at this age, we'll continue to do those things, because it really does make sure that our family remains their focus.
It certainly sounds like communication is, at the basis of sort of the success that you've had in terms of parents and getting through those tough times. And I guess you've also, both of you are really skilled at parenting from a distance. So, Colonel Hansen, I'm interested in wondering, have you given thought to how you're going to parent from space?
It's interesting, a bit of a shift for me. So, getting into a little bit of the specifics of the mission, we've sort of been preparing as a family for a 6-month mission to the International Space Station. Now I'm going on this 10-day mission around the moon, and it's a test flight. And it's the first time this vehicle flies, and just the capabilities are vastly different, and the timeline is vastly different. So a space station, we could have a conversation like we're having right now. I could have that with my family from space station. I could do that every week, and I could call them on their cell phone almost any time of day. I could call them and reach out to them. On the way to the moon, it's not going to be like that. So I'm going to be a bit of an absentee parent for those 10 days that I'm gone on the way to the moon. I'm sure I'll have, but I may only have one opportunity to speak with them from, during that journey. And so, as always, it'll be Catherine who picks up the slack, and she'll be the one toeing the line during that time. But the thing I would say to you, regardless of the mission and how long I'm gone, it's just to make some time, to leave some space for the things that you don't know that they might need during that time, or to have the conversation that they need. It's not really any more complicated than that. So when I'm gone for a long period of time, I just have to be intentional about, reaching out to them individually from time to time, and just checking in with them and seeing how they're doing. And it sort of like naturally flows where, one will just could use more than the others. And there seems to always be enough time to do what needs to be done.
Yeah, that's a very key piece of, I think, what we've really tried intentionally to do is to have individual time with each of them. And I think for that 10 days, we have no idea what it's going to feel like. It's not the timeline, but it's the duration, the distance that he'll be away, that I think will be sort of the hardest part for us. And we don't yet know what we're going to do in that 10 days, but I can assure you we'll be together.
Now, along those lines, you've had this international spotlight on yourself, Colonel Hansen, and certainly your family to some extent. What has been the impact on your children in the last several months as this was introduced and announced, and as we continue to move forward to that day in November of 2024?
I've been super proud of all three of our children. Just their response to it has just been really, really heartwarming for me. One, they're really excited, which I knew they would be like, oh, that's cool. But I didn't know they'd be quite as excited as they are. So that's really fun to see. I also noticed that they really, buy into some of the things that are important to me about this work. And that is, uniting people, creating solutions for the world. And it's not just about getting 4 humans to the moon and back. It's about much more than that. It's about the work of thousands of people who come together, at the Canadian Space Agency, at NASA, come together to this international collaboration to accomplish huge things. And they really seem to get that. And I love the fact that they think it's worthwhile work. That's really rewarding for me. But most of all, I've just been super impressed with how they respond to, a little bit of the spotlight. Right now, a lot of it is focused on the crew, but there has already been some focus on the family. This interview is an example, but also on the kids. And they really make me proud when I hear them talk and the things that they say to people and how they represent this endeavor. I'm really proud of them. And I feel like somehow magically I'm very grateful for that. They are truly ready for this challenge. It is a challenge for the family. It shouldn't be underestimated. There are challenging aspects to this, and they seem really ready to take on those challenges and to acknowledge that it won't all be easy, it won't all be roses, but that we'll get through it together as a family.
With respect to challenges, one of the challenges certainly is the dangers that are inherent in a job, in a profession, in a role like the one that you are in and about to undertake with this mission. How do you go about managing that with your children?
This will be, I think I see this as a challenge that's coming for the family, because we're sort of in the honeymoon phase of the idea of this mission. And there's a bit of a reckoning, I think, with respect to the risks, the real risks, understanding what that's going to feel like emotionally to see. I mean, this rocket, Catherine, the kids have not seen this rocket fly before. It's only flown once. I watched it live. I mean, it is a big, powerful rocket. And this will be the first time humans are on it. And I think there is going to be a bit of a reckoning with respect to this risk and the feelings and the emotions of that event, watching the launch, and then just the distance and the understanding of how far away it is. And even as I go through training, some of the things that I'm picking up on that as a crew, we're looking at, the risks and how you get out of a certain situation and other situations you just can't get out of if you end up in them. That's our business. We manage risk as a business, but we can never make the risk zero. So I think there's a lot of work to do there with respect to just equipping them to have a realistic but very optimistic outlook. Obviously, we have a very optimistic outlook on it from the Canadian Space Agency, from NASA. We really feel like we have a high probability of success, and we're willing to take the risk that something could go wrong. But I want to make sure that they have that, and I just don't feel like it's time yet. This will come as we move through the mission preparation, take them on a trip to, back to they haven't been to the Cape in a while, take them back there. Hopefully they'll see a rocket launch, with or without people on it while they're there, but just to sort of get a feeling for what they're going to sense and feel during that very acute high risk moment.
Yeah, this is something I think impossible to prepare for completely. And as with everything in our family and in my work, it's just very frank conversations. And just last night, washing and drying dishes with our 18-year-old son, I was just saying, who would you talk to if there was a big challenge in our family? What would you do if your dad wasn't around or didn't come back? And we just have those conversations very, very openly. And they don't lead to, down the rabbit hole like you would expect, because we're very optimistic and we're very excited and we anticipate things will go very well. But we will continue to have those conversations. And as their worries and fears start to come up, there's really an open dialogue and an invitation for them to always be able to ask those questions. And like I said, we can't possibly imagine it, but we will have talked about many of those scenarios many times with our kids.
To each of you, what would you say is your most proud parenting moment to date?
For me, it's not a moment. It is, or maybe it's this moment, but it's just, looking at 3 kids that I truly respect. I really do, like, just as human beings, not because I have to as their dad, but as human beings, I truly respect these people. I really love them. I love spending time with them. I love what they bring into my world. And that, I mean, that's for me, I'm just so proud of that. It's amazing.
Mm. Yeah, for me as well. There's, many, many moments that come to mind. Our son's recent graduation, he did a chapel speech, and to sit there and to listen to him reflect on the people he was grateful for that got him to where he is. That was a really heartwarming moment. And to see the girls run up and hug him at the end, to see our three kids come together as siblings in relationships that, Jeremy and I don't have with them, but they only have with each other. Those are super proud moments. So I'm just feel very blessed, very grateful, and just really proud of the humans that they are.
Final question for each of you. Any future scientists, physicians, or astronauts in your family?
We have interest in many things related to science. We have interest in psychology and biology, some interest in medicine. We even have some interest in computer, technologies, and some interest in flying recently, even in becoming a pilot, and even in some military training.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see where they ultimately end up. And as any parent, we know the right answer to that, and that is they have to follow their passions. That's what will make them happiest. That's where they'll make the most important contributions to the world. And so we're just excited to be on this journey with them and see where they'll go.
Dr. Catherine Hansen, Colonel Jeremy Hansen, thank you both so much for your time and sharing your perspective with us today.
Thank you. Appreciate you having us.